Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited that you could join us for another Agents of Transformation interview, this time with Amy Wright Glen. And thank you so much for being here today, Amy.
Oh, thank you, Melody, for welcoming me. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you.
So Amy Wright Glen earned her MA in Religion and Education from Teachers College, Columbia University. She earned her BA from Reed College in the study of religion. Amy taught for 11 years in the Religion and Philosophy Department of the Lawrence School in New Jersey, earning the Dunbar Ashton Jr. Chair for Teaching Excellence. She is a birth and death doula. She is a hospital chaplain. She is a Kripalu yoga teacher and founder of the Institute for the Study of Birth, Breath, and Death. Amy's first book, Birth, Breath, and Death, Meditations on Motherhood, Chaplaincy, and Life as a Doula, is wonderful, as is her second book, Holding Space on Loving, Dying, and Letting Go. And right now she's working on her third book, focusing on self-care for educators. So Amy, welcome. We're so excited you're here with us. We are living in wonderful, it's like we're living in the best and the worst of times. We are living in a time of collective loss that I think I couldn't have imagined in my teen and early 20s. I couldn't have imagined what we've been through with the pandemic and with all of this collective loss. We had dinner, my husband and I had dinner last night with a couple who lost their daughter in the last 2 years. And so I found you actually because I was meeting, when we moved here, I was meeting with some people who work with the dying, and that person said, do you know what Amy's doing? Do you know about Amy's book? Do you know about the Institute? And she forwarded an email from you, and I signed up for the Institute. And I would love to share with the people in my community what the Institute is about and the resources that you share on a monthly basis and what all of this is about.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, it's so wonderful to be with you again, and the joy of seeing you, having seen you both in person and now like this. It feels lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I feel really grateful for the opportunity to share. Maybe the best way to start is to explain the event that sparked the Institute. So I was at the Midwives Alliance of North America conference in 2014 or 15, one of those years, with my son in St. Louis. And I was asked to speak to a group of midwives about what people who work with the birthing can learn from people who work with the dying. Because I'm trained in both. You know, I birth doula, hospital chaplain, and that my book, Birth, Breath, and Death, had just come out, and people were inspired to say, why don't you come speak about this intersection?
Right.
And it was such an incredible conversation, Melody, just to be with this wise circle of women who have seen lots of birth, and sometimes birth and death are linked, and known sorrow, but also have known this common ground, where I had some midwives say, you know, when I was with my mom, when she died, part of me felt really similar to what it's like to be with a birthing mother. You know, there's this sacredness or this threshold space, and it's called many names in many cultures, but this recognition that there's a mystery at play that's common to birth and death. And so that conversation was so invigorating. And after I came home, I continued to think about it, and I thought, I want to create a professional space for professional development and personal development, so that people who work with birth and the people who work with death can intermingle formally, take classes together, connect with each other, speak together. And this was 2015 when the Institute was formed. And since that time, it's become more common to talk about birth and death as interwoven in terms of doula work or conscious living and dying, in 2015, I think the Institute was like the baby. We were being born into this.
Yes.
We have 900 members and 50,000 people on the Facebook page who follow regularly.
Wow.
And there are many midwives, many psychologists, many death doulas, social workers, hospice chaplains, rabbis, um, ministers from different traditions, imams, Muslim, Jew, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, secular. It's a collection of wise people from all these traditions who are interested in not just birth and death, but also breath. What does it mean to hold space for mindfulness, for
Right.
living in this world, as you said, this world of loss? And there's been so much loss, not just with the pandemic, but with environmental climate change, degradation, extinctions,
Right.
so much. And so how to breathe with that.
Right. Right.
Well, I hope that's helpful. There's a
That
little bit
is
of the story.
that is so helpful. And
Mhm.
I just have to say, without really knowing anything about you, but just knowing about the Institute, I was just so excited for this intersection because I have 5 children, and in 1990, I was the mother of 4. And so 4 times bringing a child into this world. And in 1990, I held my mother as she was dying. And what I knew at that time, the only book available to me to help prepare me for what my mother was going to go through was the wonderful book by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on death and dying. And I'd read it a couple of times, but there was no mention in that book about the grace and the majesty that I experienced. And the only other time that I had experienced that threshold energy, that liminal space, was in the delivery room when I had birthed my 4 children. And so, and in that moment, I had what is now being called a shared death experience. And then 5 years after that, when my sister Ruthie was dying, I had another one. And so I was very involved in both my mother and my sister in creating a beautiful environment in the room and in preparing others as well as myself. But the second time I realized I don't hear anyone out there in the world speaking of death in this way. It was barely at the beginning of hospice, and there wasn't even palliative care, right? And there was all this conversation about death being a pathological event or death being a failure. And of course, for a time before she died, my mother bought into that this was a failure of our ability to pray and receive the healing or the cleansing of her body. And so in your lifetime, Amy, you have been a part. You haven't just seen it, but you've actually been a part of this shift in consciousness that is bringing death back into the circle of life and honoring death and birth as these thresholds through which life flows. And so I guess I'm curious, and I've read your books, so I know that we have a lot in common as far as our background and some of our upbringing. Do you feel like what in your early life prepared you to participate, to actively be a catalyst for transformation here in the way our culture is able to experience death?
Mhm. Well, that's such a great question. And I hear you ask it with such sincerity. What in my early life may have inspired me to be a part of this shift, right? And I don't know if I can pinpoint only one event. I think there's multiplicity woven together. I think one entry point was my interest in the study of religion and philosophy. I mean, from a young age, I would go to the library and grab the books on comparative religion and philosophy. I really enjoyed that focus in college. That was my focus in college. That's what I started doing it when I taught. I taught at a boarding school. I was in the religion and philosophy department. And it was during that time in my boarding school years as a teacher that I crafted and taught a course called Myth and Ritual. And we had 3 units of study, and the first unit was creation and destruction myths, like the creation myths and destruction myths from different parts of the world. The second unit was the hero journey, and looking at the different hero motifs in different myths. And the third unit was gender, sexuality, and love, like looking at the motifs of romance, sex, and marriage. And this is a teenage group, so they were interested in all three, really. And it was through the teaching of that course and especially the ritual, we studied rituals around birth and death and puberty, and I started thinking, I don't know death. At that time, I was trained as a birth doula. I'd helped, maybe 30 women with birth. And I could speak to that as a teacher about that part of life with a lot of respect and knowledge and humbleness. But with death, it was a big mystery. Like, I'd never seen anyone die. And I felt like I wanted to be as educated about death as I was about birth. So I asked the dean of faculty at the school, can I take the next year and shift gears? I have the blessing of the school to do a chaplaincy program 45 minutes north on the train in New Brunswick, New Jersey. They had a CPE, clinical pastoral education program, and they accepted me, and I did that program through, and I still was teaching. So I was very busy, but I was busy with work that was very deep. And then I started to have the experiences around death. Like, I could speak to death. I could speak about being with the dying, with the experience of a family through mourning, with an accident or catastrophe, or and chaplains that don't only deal with death, but it was also a lot of death. And so I think what one entry point from my childhood that helped me come into this collective movement and meet people like Henry Frisco Wise, who's a friend who helped co-found Inelda, or Aditi Sethi Brown, who's one of the founders of the Center for Conscious Living and Dying, or Deanna Cochran, who's the quality care, she does death training, or Bodhi B in Hawaii, like all these people who are near and dear to me as both friends and colleagues. I met them and I came into this work primarily through the doorway of scholarship, right? Because I was interested in the study of myth, ritual, philosophy, religion. It's not the only doorway, but I think that was a real entryway for me. There's other doorways I could speak to, but I'll just stop there. I think that answers the question to some extent.
Yeah.
But I
So,
have a question for you, though.
okay.
When you said you had a shared death experience with your mother and sister, that's the first time I've heard someone describe being with the dying and using that term exactly. Can you share what you mean for me? Educate me about that. What does that mean for you?
Yeah. So you've heard of Dr. Raymond Moody and his book on near-death experiences. I think it was in 2010, and he had been doing all this research on near-death experience for his career, and his mother was dying, and he was gathered in her room with his siblings as his mother took their last breath, and they all experienced certain phenomena. And they all experienced, part of what she was experiencing. And so he began to do some research on these experiences. And one of his students, William Peters, actually just this last year, his book came out, and oh goodness, I'm going to blank on the title, but it's about shared death experience. And I had him as a guest. So a shared death experience is where someone close to the person dying. They don't even have to be in physical proximity, but someone close to the person who is dying has a partial or a fullness of what the dying person is experiencing. And there's certain phenomena that have been tracked, and some of this research has gone back through the centuries, because it's a new term, shared death experience. Dr. Raymond Moody coined it, and the phenomena has been going on probably through the ages. So so in my case, as my mother was dying, I was there in the room with several of my sisters and my dad, and we all experienced the room filling with light, the room filling with grace. I was holding her, I was on the bed holding her, and I experienced her consciousness rise up through, this is long before I had the yogic teaching terms, the Sushumna, but I felt her body, or her consciousness, rise up through the trunk of her body and leave out the crown of her head. And as it did, I saw from her perspective that she was moving into a world of light. I saw her dad. I saw her friend Ralphina, who had passed earlier. I had never met my mother's father because he died when she was just 5. But the joy in their embrace, and from the pictures that I had seen, I knew who he was. And so I felt all of this like reunion energy, even as I was the one announcing to my family, she's gone. And we were all there crying. And then she turned around and saw us weeping over her body. And one at a time, I saw her heart open, and she sent a stream of light and love. And literally, as we received that, our tears stopped midair. I mean, we couldn't like be in the grief at the moment we were feeling her bliss and joy. And we stopped crying. We looked around and we all said, do you feel that? Do you feel that love? And she was there with us for several minutes more. And then we all knew the moment she left, and we knew she had gone to be with my brothers. And when we phoned them just minutes later, they knew she was gone because they had felt her. So in that way, we all shared in that experience. And I've had, out of the many deaths I've attended, I've now had 7 shared death experiences. And it really speaks to the holiness, the sacredness of this threshold of, and so one of the things in my book that I talk about is the fallacy that death is the opposite of life. And my belief is that birth and death are portals through which life flows. And that's how I hold it. And I think when we hold these more expanded, perhaps more mature ways of experiencing death, there's more of the experience that we can experience.
I just want to take a moment and acknowledge that you shared something so personal and beautiful. And there's so much incredible love in that story. That your mom's powerful love for her family still ripples through time and space, even into me. I never met her. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also consider what a shared birth experience may be, having been with people through birth and having people call, like, you're in labor, I know, or I feel, or, I wonder with those portal energies that those who are close and sensitive can intuit.
Right. Yeah. So explain to me, Amy, when you were doing this chaplaincy program and teaching, were you also mothering? Was your son born at this point?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so how old is he now?
He's 10.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
So I taught at Lawrenceville from 2000 to 2011. And in 2011, in the spring of 2011, I left the school and went overseas to teach. And he was born in the winter of 2011. So I was pregnant when I went to Columbia, Bogota, Columbia to teach. And he
Wow.
was born the year of my international teaching. And then I came back to the States and chose to work from home those early years, crafting books. And I mean, really, the Institute was born for many reasons. I mean, the story of the Manna Conference for sure was the inspiration. And another key inspiration was Tabor, because I had a 2-year-old at home, 3-year-old at home, and I really didn't want to return to full-time teaching with him being that young.
Right.
And I wanted to find a way to support our family. And that was also part of what inspired the Institute. It's not the only thing, but these converging influences gave me the courage to try something innovative and new. It was courageous. I look back now, I think that was really courageous to put
Yes.
myself out there in my work and bring in other voices and host. Just before we do this interview, I was leading a 2-hour circle called Rituals for Menopause. And that again is a breath, hold, and it's a birth and death in that, right? That the
Right.
birth of a time with no periods, the birth of the second chapter of a woman's life post reproductive years, but the death of the periods, the death of fertility active in the body, and what that means in our culture, socially, what that means for the body, biologically, what that means for us spiritually. And we have 60 something women in this circle.
Mm,
And
how
so
beautiful.
it's beautiful. And it's not common to have a group of people from many traditions gather and
Right.
speak openly and connect and design a ritual together that's broad enough to include many points of view to honor our diverse experiences of menopause. So
Yeah.
that's just one example. And I do think there's just this sense of awe sometimes that I don't think I created the Institute. Yes, I did on one level, but on another level, it just moved through me. The confluence of all these different influences, like my interest in religion, philosophy, my son being young, going to the Manna Conference and doing that talk. It was like the perfect synergy to birth something.
Right.
Mhm.
And I see it as just a part, a very important part of this return, of this move, this arc, this journey that I believe consciousness, our collective, is making from patriarchy and into partnership, from a one up, one down relationship with birth or with death, where it's medicalized, the locus of attention is the medical team, to a organic, family-centered, the locus of attention is on the birthing or the dying one. And you allow the sacred when you do it in this way that is, at once more ancient and also a future. It's like the ancient future we're working with here. We're bringing back some things that have been lost, and we are expanding that. And I feel how important this is because for me, death, my experience of death, like the only way that I recognized the significance of the moment was because I had been fully awake, aware, and present and participating in the births of my children. And I recognized, oh my goodness, there's so much similarity here. Yeah. Yeah. And so, there was a book in my very Mormon childhood that I think of the title of this book a lot. And you may have heard of it. It was written by Paul Dunn, I think. And the book is This Birth we call death.
Mm.
And so I feel like there were many beautiful things about growing up Mormon, and one of those was the deep respect and reverence that is held for birth, that is held for death, that is held for a spiritual experience.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, for sure. And my childhood in the LDS tradition certainly crafted a sensitivity for me on those levels.
Yeah. It's interesting that I was in the religion club in high school. And I was the most fascinated with indigenous traditions. So I've continued that study for myself as well. So with your work in the Institute and with your work with your doulas, because you have doula programs, yes?
I do train, well, I should say I don't train and certify people to become doulas, but anyone who is interested in being a doula, who's a student doula or a seasoned doula, can sign up for any institute course. There's only one course that has some prerequisites, and that's the course where we train the pregnancy loss group facilitators. So that course does have some prerequisites, and I co-teach that course with a psychologist based out of Durham in North Carolina, and her name is Dr. Melissa Ming Foynes. She's incredible. So she and I designed the course together and thought, this would be a course for people who have some seasoning in this work. If you're holding space in a group setting for pregnancy loss, I think that it's good to have some seasoning, whether that's through mental health or through birth work. However, sometimes people will email me saying, hey, I want to be a death doula. And I have this email that I send back saying, okay, well, here are some organizations to look at. These offer certifications. The Institute is set up to help you professionally and personally grow in that path. But I don't certify you to be a death doula.
Right.
There are so many people doing that. I'll just pass that on. It's a wonderful, wonderful work, and no need to reinvent the wheel. What I do is offer courses that I think help and support people drawn to the threshold work. So for instance, there's a course called Shadow Work. And in that course, we take the time to really explore our own individual shadow stories so that they're more integrated and digested. So when we show up to our doula work, birth or death, or midwifery work, or psychological work, or whatever work, teaching, mothering, fathering, whatever work, the shadow self, the shadow aspects of self are befriended
Yeah.
and less likely to be highly activated or triggered.
Right.
I think that kind of work is vital
Yes.
to, as you said, to move from patriarchy to partnership, because patriarchy tends to be very much a fear-based tradition.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fear in patriarchy. It's a lot about fear of control, of losing control.
Right.
And there's a lot of people who are afraid of the patriarchal leaders who are often willing to defend their power with violence. Not always, but often. So I think digesting the shadow helps us shift out of that framework.
Yes. Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. It's been so important. Every time I find myself really activated by what's happening politically, I create a shadow altar where I'm looking at those that trigger me and finding within myself, where do I find this in myself? And how can I bring this into some compassion within myself? Because the changes we want to see out there must first be created in our own consciousness. And I just, yeah, I love that you're doing that shadow work course. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. So there's lots of resources for people, even people who just want to come in with the breath aspect. Like I want my life to be more mindful. I want to be able to hold space for others in my life who are experiencing loss and challenge in a way that doesn't diminish or disrespect them.
Exactly. Beautiful. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me, Amy, what is moving for you right now? What is exciting and alive that you're most excited about? I know you're involved in the Center for Conscious Living and Dying. I know you're involved in a lot of projects. I know you just moved to Asheville. So yay for us.
I know, I love it. It's beautiful here. Let's see. I'm very energized by the launch and successful launch of the first Institute International Study trip. So every year, the Institute hosts and organizes a trip to a country where we purposely go as birth and death doulas or whoever, whoever wants to attend, uh, and study how rituals around birth and death manifest in contemporary life in that country. So in June, we had 14 people come with us. We went to Guatemala and we met with traditional Mayan midwives. We met with traditional Mayan healers, funeral guides. It was so incredible. And then we start our own day with meditation and yoga and qigong, and then dream work and classes and sightseeing and dinners together, a community. And then this next summer, so it happens in June every year, will be Ireland. So we're in the
Oh,
planning stages right now, of Ireland. So please come if you can. It will be, and it's just so exciting to then think, okay, well then the year after that is Jamaica. And what's the, like where are we taking the Institute every year in June? And there's times where I wish I'm 48. I just wish that my body was 28 sometimes again. I'd have 20 more years of this energy, because
right.
I will keep going. I hope I have many years regardless. I mean, 78, I still would love to continue this work, and I know that there's something to be said about aging and time. And it's just that I found a path that brings so much joy to me.
Yeah.
And I want to stretch it like putty to make it last a long time.
Wow. It just sounds amazing. And I actually have a resource for you for Ireland. So we'll connect about that
Okay.
later because
Okay.
I've studied with an Irish shaman that you may want to connect with.
Cool.
Yeah, some really powerful things. So and you've got the retreat coming up, which I'm signed
Yes,
up for.
yes, in
So
October. So we have about 38 people coming so far,
oh
and
wonderful.
it's still a few months away. We'll see how it manifests. We'll have some classes and discussion and music, and really just a time for the Institute to gather. We haven't gathered for 6 years. We gathered the very first year I launched it in Fort Lauderdale, or Pompano Beach, and we had maybe 12 people come, and it was just amazing. And now we'll have a slightly larger gathering with more speakers and music, and I'm thrilled. And it will be at the sanctuary,
Yes, it will be. I'm so
and
excited.
that's such a beautiful place.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll be sharing more about the sanctuary. I was just out there to do some feng shui and it's being remodeled. And so I'll be sharing with more about that as the process unfolds. But it's a very exciting the Center for Conscious Living and Dying is a very exciting project to be a part of. And that land and that building is very special. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Well, I am just so excited to have connected and I would encourage people who are listening to, and I'll put in the show notes, I'll put your Facebook page because I follow you on Instagram and Facebook, and I think also on Twitter now. And every single time I see something that you're posting, it's like, I feel uplifted, I feel inspired. It's
Aw.
for me an antidote to so much of what is out there in the news. And so some people say, oh, I don't go on social media anymore. It's too depressing. And I think you need to follow more people like Amy.
It's not as depressing. We're only slightly depressing. We're not full on depressing. It's just a moderate depression. No, it's mostly uplifting. But there are stories that are hard. And, with the war in Ukraine, I have posted things and we've tried to raise money. And I think it's important to hold, again, the shadow
Right?
energies, that they don't go in the driver's seat. I mean, that's the whole point of shadow work. You integrate, but the shadow energies, which represent the discarded, the addicted, the compulsive, or the insecure, fearful, angry parts of the self, which all need to be honored and integrated. Those
Right.
elements don't go in the driver's seat of the car and drive your life,
Right. Right.
right? That's what
Exactly.
happens when you ignore them. So for so long, they're like, "Oh, we're having an insurrection. We're taking over." But I think part of social media is it can represent some of the shadow elements of our culture,
Yeah, it's
right? And
true.
so how to have people posting or consuming it who have already done some of their shadow work would shift the narrative of what we're showing the world.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. Oh my goodness. It's so exciting to be in conversation with you, Amy, and to feel the power of the work you're doing and the energies of collaboration. So we know that at least in my generation, I don't know about yours, you're a little younger than me, but it was all about competition. Once you got out of, well, even in school, right? It was about competition for the best grade, and then it's about competition for the raise or the tenure or the whatever. And that's just never been something I could tolerate or do. And so for me, it was all about collaboration and cooperation and community. And when you have true community, you're bringing forth from divergent perspective and lived experience, you're bringing forth um, these amazing viewpoints that can create a stronger container. And this is what you've done. And this is, it's so multidimensional. So I just really celebrate the Institute, your work. I can't wait to read your next book. So,
Thank
yeah.
you. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me. And I look forward to giving you a hug in person.
All right. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.